Hi everyone, welcome to our fifth session. The focus of the session today is looking in different strategy processes and how strategy is actually forming an organization. You remember in session 1 I introduced you new key terminologies and also introduced you this particular slide. The argument is that in an organization, the realized strategy is a combination of something that is deliberate and something that is emergent. And this emergent strategy comes from changes to mainly the environment. But sometimes it could also changes to internal organizations, like for example you have appointed a new board member and the board member has a specific skills and also experience to dabble into something different, and as a rising from this it's good to make use of some of the internal resources, which is a new board member to dabble into something new. So this represents the emerging strategy. Of course, another simple example of emerging strategy is when there's a change in the government regulation. The government regulation forces to change the direction, and that means represents some emerging strategy. Another example could be a major global trade player just come into market, and this global player causes a new threat to the competition and you're losing your market share, so you have to do something about it, and that's again represent an emergent strategy. The deliberate strategy, on the other hand, comes from a process of planning, design, and this is what we have learned so far in session 1 to 4. The process of considering of external environment, the process of considering internal environment, and just emphasize on having all these captured into one framework, which is the SWOT framework, represent a deliberate way of thinking and more of scientific way of thinking to allow the organization to come out with deliberate strategy. And also this combination of deliberate and emergent strategy that come forward for the organizations and reach to realize a strategy. The intended strategy on the left side top could be some organizational mission and process of designing, considering strategy, and then choosing the strategy to one specific strategy or one or two specific strategy. The rest of them through the process of, for example, stakeholder analysis may not be a good fit for the organization. Therefore, they are dropped out, or we call them unrealized strategy. So these the intended strategy, driven strategy, and realized strategies are the three key three areas that we have covered in session 1. When we talk about the strategic management, it is a relatively new discipline that came about maybe around 50s or 60s. Before that, we had different or other departments or other disciplines that sort of give you a clue to a strategy. And one of the departments might be the department of forecasting, where we like to forecast the market demand as well as forecast the operational need and to ramp up the production facilities to meet anticipated changes in demand. So then organization realize that there is a need to do a better planning. And there's also need to do sort of a market-led kind of a strategy, so as to allow the organization to cope better. So that of course it was a rise of corporate planning and market-led demand forecasting, and the result or outcome of it was at the company level to cope and go ahead with something longer term and then just coping for a year. So organization come out with, for example, 5-year plan, and a 5-year plan is realistically reasonable plan because it allows you, the organization, not just to think what's going to happen next year, but also to buy equipment to recruit manpower for the 3rd year and for the 4th year as well. And there is more realistic because for example, who are in human resource, it is not good to recruit someone and expect someone to know your product and services well and perform to optimum capacity immediately. So for example, the company they have medium-term plan to, for example, expand in country A, and in the next 5 years they start recruit people from that country A as a new recruits to the organization, simply because it is in their plan to expand into that country A, or maybe there might be some emergent strategy coming on board and they delay that plan, or maybe sometimes they cancel their plan. But it is fun because the staff that they recruited on board they have the additional capability. For example, able to speak in different language doesn't mean it is wrongly executed or it was a bad strategy for the company, because these people can also contribute in other ways. Rather than speaking that country A's language, they are also loyal staff and well-performing staff and meet any other criteria that the company was recruiting. So additional criteria, for example, if they have a native speaker of that country A, so of course they have an advantage for leadership position if the company, for example, in 5 years time, if the company go ahead with a plan in country A. So if there's a plan, we can always work towards something. In the 80s, strategy management took a turn for that, something that is not just planning, but an event of analyzing deeper a strategy of industry and a strategy of competitors, so that this organization is able to cope better in managing competition. And this becomes very important because that era begins of era of acquisition or mergers and acquisition, and the companies with sufficient resources find that they are actually investing and selling companies, subsidiaries, or managing portfolio of businesses. And when they have acquired new entities, they look in or try to optimize the performance of newly acquired entity and integrate into the existing investment. This is basically process or business process re-engineering. So this was the era in 80s where the corporate strategy started to form, and in the 90s they look beyond an industry. They look into the resource of the company, they're also looking to understanding the global supply chain, a global competitive advantage rather than industry-led competitive advantage. So that was the 1990s. There is a slight change in the direction from market-led all the way to resource-led strategy. So we see the market-led strategies in the 70s. We see the resource-led strategies in the late 80s and 90s. And basically these sort of very kind of prescriptive way of forming the strategy. And by word prescriptive, you can imagine is that a medical doctor prescribing a medicine for you to better your body performance, for example. You don't ask the doctor, hey, why do you give me the yellow pill and the red pill? And are you sure it is correct for you to prescribe me 3 yellow pills and then 2 red pill? You don't question that because it's prescriptive, give it to you. This school or the design school basically analyzes how the strategy should be formed and prescribe the strategy to the organization, and therefore they are very prescriptive in nature. Then we have some school that in strategy that we're going to learn in the next few slides, they are not so prescriptive, they are more descriptive in nature. So basically you get a better understanding by seeing and talking about how this strategy in fact are really for in the organization. So they don't have a kind of a deep analysis in order to for you to come up with a prescribed strategy. In fact, it is more fluid and it is more descriptive in nature. And the third type of a school is configuration school. Basically, it's combination of the different schools of thought, and they try to say they integrate the different natures of different schools. So what that means, so it brings us to a strategy formulation 10 school of thoughts by Henry Mintzberg to look through this. So Henry Mintzberg come with this book called Strategy Safari, where he introduces different facets of their strategy and how a strategy are really formed, why people or why practitioners, why academics are still fiddling with a strategy and trying to understand and put a frame towards a strategy by using the strategy elephant to explain. So all of us are kind of like a blind man, right? And we can only understand the world based on our own experience, and of course each of us has different experience. Some of you might be born in country A, somebody might born in country B and they have the experience from country B and less experience from country A. Somebody might born in country C and then great experience in country C and very little experience of country B and very little experience of country A or other countries. So our view of the world in this case, our view of a strategy is very much limited by what we know and what we experience. Coming back to this story of, for example, a blind man, right? Imagine if we cover our eyes and we don't see it. So if we cover our eyes and we don't see it and we touch the tail of the elephant, what does we feel of the elephant is? Right? So we might looking into, you might feel like it might be a, what we call it. It might be like a rope, right? Right. So we might feel it's a rope. It's not so thick. Then to us might be, or for example, this person A, that person might find that elephant is very similar to a rope, and then ask everybody come and feel it. So the next person is cover the eyes and also maybe hit to the, or touch into the tusk or the teeth of the elephant. And this is the person B. So he touches the teeth of the elephant, and it's a smooth, it's not like a rope, and it cannot bend. What does it feel like? It might feel like a pipe or a steel pipe, right? So, and it might be smooth, right? And then, yeah, or a steel pipe, right? So again, a steel pipe, then that person might tell the other people, come and feel, it look like a steel pipe, right? The next person who covers might bump into the leg of the elephant. It's a big leg. It's size of the tree trunk, right? So, and it's and dispute against the two other people and say, hey guys, this is completely different to what you're saying. It's not a rope, it's not a steel, it's big, right? You guys are having a different seeing of this, right? So, and then they might call another person come, and that person might be a little bit taller, might feel the ear of the elephant, and what the ear might feel like, right? It might be like a leaf, or might be a big blanket, right? Right. So the story goes on and on. So it's all about which part of a strategy that you come across, and this therefore feels different things to different people who comes across a different part of the strategy. In 1960, a strategy all around designer school. Of course, a good example of designer school is what we have been teaching you in a particular diagram, where a strategy is a process of design to achieve essential fit between the internal environment and external environment. And it's one of the oldest school of strategy, derived from management science, mix of management science and engineering, and makes a strategy like a science. Then afterward, this is probably 10 to 15 years afterward, the position school came about, and it's become the dominant view in 1980s, where everybody became very excited when Professor Michael Porter from Harvard came up from his first book called Competitive Strategy. And in this book, he is the first one who ever provided insight into what makes an industry attractive, and what makes an industry attractive because it is profitable. And why it is profitable? Because it's because inherent features of industry structure. So it came from economic perspective, as opposed to previous one where it was a management science and mix of the engineering and again management science, where we learn in the designer school. So that's about positioning school, where it allows us to have a look at the verb and understand its position with respect to other firms in the industry. And of course, there are various ways to implementing the position in school. So there are other ways, for example, strategy grouping. From this diagram, it's another way to positioning the company against other companies. So we go to next type of a school. If you remember, we're talking about descriptive rather than prescribed. So the best is looking to describe how the strategy come about. If you're looking at the earliest slide, we can only understand, for example, from intend a strategy to deliberate or imagine the strategy to realize a strategy, if you remember in the first slides. And we're looking at entrepreneur school, where we find that in some smaller organization and possibly in some medium-sized or large organization as well, due to the culture, the strategy forming information is centered on the intuition of senior decision makers. So it resides on some individuals rather than going through some sort of formal plan or formal analysis. The individuals have a very exceptionally good and like a gut feeling, and the person influences and changes the strategy of the organizations from time to time, depending on the changes in perspective and changes in vision. However, if you ask the experienced entrepreneur how this idea of doing things in certain ways from entrepreneur, he or she will be share with you how the external forces, for example, influence his or her thinking, and how they find some opportunities and resources also influence their thinking. So he or she has a very clear idea of what's going on, but it resides in their head rather than in, like, for example, 20 pages of analysis. So this is the characteristics of the entrepreneur school. Now, from the perspective of psychology, it is recognized that strategies can be developed as a model or a map in the head of some people, and using the idea, the model, or the framework, and the organization or the individual can form a subjective and interpretative view of the organization and its processes. So, cognition in this case is used to construct strategies as interpretations of what's going on or what's going around the world. There was an interest by academics in origin of these strategies. Also, we need to recognize the organization learn. Things in organization learn, and two things can step at a time. So based on good experience and bad experience, organization learns what to do, what not to do as well. So the formulation implementation process of the strategy is iteration process where it is intertwined, and so we implementing and we formulate the next step, and then we implement and learn from the next step. And this is the argument of the learning at school. So it's related to incrementalism and or emerging strategy, where it is means that you have a direction and take things that you establish the things. It is also recognized that the strategies making process in organization is rooted in fragmented of individuals and self-interested of some individual, and we see that in organization, between partners, between departments in organization. So for example, marketing department will have their marketing agenda to spend more money so that they grow the market, to capture wider audience, to capture more sense of the market, and spending more advertising and everything, and the KPI is to increase the market share. The operation department on the other side, they might have different agenda, right? So they, for example, the operation departments, they see strategy formation as a process of wanting to maintain quality and consistency and efficiency in their product. So they're relying reliance in that aspect. So when it comes to the budgeting of the money for the next year, there will be power struggle, right? Because we need to look into how to allocate the money, and what is more important, growing market share is important, or having a consistency, efficiency in the final product, or quality products is important. So it's basically politics between individuals or departments in the organization. Now, as opposite to power school, we also recognize that the strategy is cultural process as well. So depending on whether you are from country A or country B, social process within organizations are very different with a strong unifying culture. And also culture may have some policies as well to group things, and they might have some discouraging significant strategy change as well, where, for example, group things means people try to echo each other's says in avoiding any conflict. Of course, it is a cultural thing. It happens in different culture as well as many countries as well. It means that if you have a different view, you are people with different view might not be part of the team, but grouping result in common mentality and the team able to perform better. Well, however, there might be a blind spot and nobody might not be to see or even voice out. The environmental school acquires the understanding from the discipline of biology and how organization actually plan into contingency. So we have organizations that have planned and also plan to react to contingency. A good example would be like we are planning for exhibition, for example, tomorrow, and then in case it rains, how are we going to secure the venue, how to set up an alternative venue and make the alternative also ready in any situation that event can go on. So environmental schools look at degree of freedom, a number of variables that can possibly influence the outcome, and plan for react to the contingency to that. So looking into impromptu quick manage how the organization or organism can react to the changes to the external environment, and in a chapter of the strategy safari in the environmental school, it was likened that the organization behave like a one cell organism, the amoeba. If you heard about this organization before, for example, this organization able to adapt to the environment and change the shape to meet the needs of the environment in order to survive and in order to move on. So the environmental school is also depicted by scenario planning, like this is like exercises where you create all the alternative scenarios and you put landmark event into this scenario to steer you into the direction that the organization may be going into a certain scenario but not another scenario. This is a case where organization made use of the environmental school. Now, in real life, organization changes in configuration or structure, the process of transformation, each in their own time and complexity. So, organization can start off by entrepreneurial school and display the characteristics of the learning within the organization, but as a result to some changes either internally or externally, they may learn new skills. They may decide to go into the position in the school of the strategic management in order to cope better with the market and resource-led strategy, and then they may go through a phase of a power school when they got new staff joining the organization. They result in a little bit of a power struggle. So organization do exhibit a different type of schools at one point in time compared to another time. And actually, if you understand the nature of these schools, you can see and witness how organization change and how strategy formulations takes place in organization in, for example, 2000, 2005, 2008, because organizations reconfiguring itself due to different reasons. So a strategy safari is quite interesting because it's not saying that the strategy is not about one type of activity. It can be a visionary process. It can be a mental process. It can be a transformational process involving few schools. So a strategy can be prescriptive in nature, as you can see the first three schools that we learned, and it can be also with softer nature, and also we can call them descriptive nature, and lastly it can be a mixture of few schools, transform from one school to another school. So with that we can conclude kind of introduction to a strategy. So that's it for today's session, and thank you very much, and all the best.